Hi everyone, welcome. The online webinar is part 3 of Bringing Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, or ACT, skills into your daily life. And this series has been hosted by Utah State University's Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Research Group. My name is Dakota Pond, and I'm a certified social worker at the Sorensen Legacy Foundation Center for Clinical Excellence, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar, and the webinar is being recorded. Before we get started, we want to respectfully acknowledge that Utah State University is a land-grant institution, and our activities throughout the state of Utah take place on tribal ancestral lands. These lands have been carefully stewarded by the Goshute, Navajo, Shoshone, Paiute, Ute, and Ute Mountain Ute tribes. We offer our respect and recognition to their elders past, present, and future. Before we get started, I'll also provide a quick introduction to the Sorensen Legacy Foundation Center for Clinical Excellence. The Sorensen Center consists of various clinics and professionals who provide services like early intervention classrooms, hearing and balance services, speech-language therapy, behavior support services, housing and financial counseling, social work, psychology, marriage and family therapy, and an assessment team. If anyone would like more information about any of these services, you can contact me via email or my office phone number, both of which will be posted in the next slide. So today's presenters will be Carter Davis and Marissa Donahue. During the webinar presentation, everybody will remain muted. You can send questions to everyone in the chat or privately to me. We will have a question and answer during the last 15 minutes in which people will be able to unmute themselves. And then also a link of the recording will be available, and we'll share that on our social media pages, and also you can email me if you'd like that recording. And I will go ahead and turn things over to Carter and Marissa.
All right, thank you for that lovely introduction, Dakota. And just gonna start sharing my slides. All right, so today, let's see, we're talking about how to practice present moment awareness during pandemic, which is a tall order, admittedly, but Marissa and I have been thinking about how we can offer you some guidance on this. So just real quick, my name's Carter. I am in my 3rd year here at Utah State studying clinical and counseling psychology. I work in the ACT research group, obviously, studying different kinds of therapy for issues such as depression, schizophrenia, some online self-help as well. And I'm also really glad to be a part of the Sorensen Center, where we are supported in our own research, but we also have these really neat chances to share the work we do with people outside of our office, which is always good. Yeah, Marissa, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome everybody. My name is Marissa. I'm a 1st-year graduate student. I'm in the same program, so it's the Combined Clinical and Counseling program here at USU. I'm in the ACT research group as well. And my areas of interest are really around ACT-based interventions for those living with a chronic illness. But our lab offers such a variety of different populations, but I kind of contribute in like a health psych way. That's really where my passion is. As we go through this presentation, I just wanted to make mention, I'll invite you all, Carter and I will both invite you to do some reflections. You can do them silently, or if it's helpful to kind of pull out a piece of paper and pen and just kind of write things down as we go. And we hope that towards the end we can kind of open everything up for discussion, and we can kind of reflect together on what we've jotted down throughout our time.
Great. let's see. So, put up this question, what is mindfulness? And I think actually this is the first time that I'm going to ask us just to pause for a second, because mindfulness is a word that we probably encounter more and more these days, and you know, we all have different ideas or experiences of what it means, and so let me just take a few seconds now just to kind of notice what you think of when you hear this word mindfulness. Maybe it's part of your life some way. Maybe it's just something you've heard a lot about or read about. Or maybe like me, you're having a thought right now that's like, a bit guilty. I should be more mindful. That might be your main association, and that's fair. So if we think of the historical context, very interesting. So just this concept of mindfulness broadly, sort of, it finds its, I guess most direct historical lineage in the Pali language, which is the sort of Theravada Buddhist scriptural language from India and that whole subcontinent. And there's a word sati, which, you know, and these translations are always imperfect, but most closely kind of translates to remembrance or recollection, this word. And it's different than what we might think of as memory. It's a little more like kind of remembering, you know, your presence, or your, you know, bringing awareness to who you are right now. You know, the world outside kind of pulls you out of the moment, and it's a kind of remembering or recalling just who you are in a more pure sense. So it's kind of a nice connotation there. But, you know, Marissa and I, we work in psychology, and so we use the language of psychology, and that's primarily, you know, how we'll talk about mindfulness in this talk. And so that's, you know, I put up these other definitions, which are a little different because they're using more of the scientific language. You know, a receptive attention and awareness of present events and experiences. Or this more expanded one I like a lot from Jon Kabat-Zinn, which is moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness cultivated by paying attention in a specific way with non-reactivity, non-judgmentality, and with an open heart. So there's a lot of pieces at play there. But I invite you to keep in mind, like, you know, we're going to be talking in more this psychological, scientific language. But if we think of the experience of mindfulness as a felt sense or a felt state, you know, there's so many commonalities between, you know, different world religions, spiritual practices. We're all kind of tapping into, in a way, the same thing. But Marissa and I, you know, we draw from mindfulness a lot to address mental health. And so, you know, hence kind of the language we use around it. But just keep in mind as we speak today that, you know, we're kind of all pointing to the same thing, no matter our different ideas or backgrounds with mindfulness. And how does this relate to what we do here? So as Dakota introduced us, we're in the Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Research Lab here at USU. And, you know, some people attending, like if, you know, I certainly didn't know until I started studying psychology that there were many different kinds of therapy you can get. There are. And we focus on a specific kind, which we shorten to ACT. And mindfulness is kind of permeates all aspects of ACT. And before I talk about a bit what ACT looks like in practice, I'd like to just, you know, share with you that this approach to mental health and well-being has really been in development since the early 1980s and has been rigorously tested since, you know, around late 90s, early 2000s. So going on 20 years plus. Over 35,000 people have participated in studies of ACT. And interestingly, you know, some of you, if you're following news about the COVID vaccines, you might, I don't know, you might be learning more about, you know, clinical trials and randomized trials. And interestingly, we do the exact same thing with therapy as you would test a vaccine, actually. So, you know, we do studies where we actually have an active group where they receive therapy, and then a placebo or control group where some people, you know, get something that's not therapy that, you know, maybe keeps their attention but doesn't kind of have the same active components. Or they're on a wait list and we give them the same treatments, and we kind of compare differences there. So it's the same science. And recently there's been, you know, a review of over 130 studies of ACT. So it's like a study of other studies, concluding that ACT is effective for a very wide range of mental health concerns. And so even just in what Marissa and I were talking about, you know, you kind of got a glimpse of that, whether it's depression, anxiety, health-related behaviors. You know, in our lab, we work with all kinds of people. And just what we focus on, and no matter what we're treating, I like to think of these three pillars of open, centered, and engaged. So open is really what we're talking about today. That's that mindfulness component of just noticing that we have a mind that behaves strangely, and that we can pause and watch more consciously. And when we do so, this helps us to kind of develop a sense of ourselves, or a sense of identity that is not dependent on, you know, day-to-day kind of fluctuations or changes in mood. That's the centered component. And then, you know, once we have this this awareness and this ability to keep our mind on a leash, we often say, then it helps us engage with things we care about. We can actually go out and do more things because we're less, you know, tied up in psychological struggles. So very broadly, that's what we try to do in ACT, and you can sort of see how mindfulness might play into each of those components.
Okay, so I just want to bring forth this other half of the presentation that we're going to be talking about today, and it's really kind of addressing what we're all going through right now and living through this global pandemic. As we're living through these times, I just want to bring up some very specific stressors that are either being introduced or increased risk, or just maybe more awareness around these kind of daily stressors that we have. And so the first one is during this time, we might be experiencing more increased amounts of isolation for an extended period of time due to quarantining. There might be some extra worry or fear about your physical and mental health, as well as the health of your loved ones. You may be experiencing worry about some major changes related to a current financial situation. So this might look like, the potential loss of employment or maybe a major change in salary. You may also be worried about changes in your housing situation. So maybe during this time, there's been increased rent or something's happened where you're unable to pay your rent. And these are very significant stressors in the combination. Some additional ones, these stressors can put us at an increased risk for poor sleep quality, or it might also change how we are eating or maybe our physical activity patterns. So we might be choosing to cope with our stressors with unhealthy eating, or we might just have really low motivation to exercise these days. You might be finding it a little bit more difficult to concentrate each day. We're also at an increased risk of substance use or abuse during these times, in using things like tobacco or alcohol, and to just really help us cope with the stress or combination of the stressors that we're feeling. You may be stressed in this time because you're experiencing limited access to healthcare. And this might be due to any transportation issues. It could be overcrowded hospitals and clinics in your area. Or maybe you don't have health insurance during this time. And then lastly, I really want to point on this idea that we might all be experiencing a level of difficulty in living with uncertainty of what our future looks like. And that can weigh really heavy on us. And so here's just a list of a few. It isn't everything that we all might be experiencing, but some common threads. And I want to take a moment to kind of pause and do another moment of reflection. So either silently or with that pen and paper. But we've noticed in our lives or our families' lives that these certain stressors can affect us in all kinds of ways. And I'd like you to reflect specifically on what's maybe most impacting you during this time. Now, it can be something from this list, or it can just be something that's not listed here. And we also want to recognize it might be hard to just put those stressors into words. So maybe think about what's leaving you feeling uncertain or unsettled during this time. And so we'll just take a few seconds now. I'll kind of pause if you want to think about that or write it down, and then we'll kind of move forward. Okay, I'm going to move forward, but if you're still writing, that's okay. You can kind of just hear me actively, maybe in the background. So I know that that was probably a lot of doom and gloom, just kind of addressing all of these stressors. So the follow-up comment to that is that there's good news. There are ways that we can implement practices each day to help us cope with these stressors. And so practicing mindfulness can help enhance our well-being and serve as a protective factor when dealing with stressful situations. Also, mindfulness is a low to no cost, and it can teach us skills that will not only help us during this time of living through a pandemic, but any change that will happen coming forward, and change we know is inevitable. So it's a good skill set to learn to be able to adjust to change in the moment. I do want to know, as Carter kind of touched on already, that mindfulness is an evidence-based practice. And so as of October of 2019, researchers have reviewed about 200 studies that were looking at mindfulness and found that mindfulness-based therapy was effective for reducing stress, anxiety, and depression. It could also help treat specific problems like major depression or chronic pain or smoking and addiction. There's the strongest evidence in this area is around those who are struggling with depression, and specifically mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is also just known as MBCT. It can significantly reduce relapse in people who have experienced previous episodes of major depression. And even more, mindfulness-based interventions can improve our physical health symptoms. So we've seen in patients of chronic pain that it's effective in reducing pain symptoms as well as fatigue that they're feeling as well.
All right, so we wanted to give you all just a taste of this right now, with, you know, no pressure in the next 10 minutes to cure any of these conditions that Marissa just mentioned. But I wanted to lead us all just through a very, very simple and brief mindfulness practice that I have personally found helpful over the past few weeks. In fact, I attended another meditation virtual meeting, and it was right after the election night, and we practiced this, so it was helpful then. So I hope it might be helpful to you all now. And what I'd like to invite you to do is just take a moment to get comfortable, whatever that means for you. If you want to stay seated where you are. If you feel good, that's fine. Or if you'd rather move somewhere else, as long as you can hear me, that's okay. You're welcome to turn off your video, whatever you like to do to feel comfortable. So let's just take a moment to get settled in. Sometimes I like to roll my shoulders or kind of shake out your arms a lot, just to get comfy. And if you would like to close your eyes, I will do that, and I invite you to. Or you may simply focus your gaze softly on a point in front of you, just so your eyes are in a relaxed position. And see if you can get into a place where your feet are touching the ground. Your body is supported by your seat. Start by just noticing that connection between your feet and the ground. Feel the floor beneath your feet. Notice how this connects you to the earth below. Just feel that weight. And notice your body coming in contact with the seat, feeling support. Just notice how you are resting now, supported, safe. And I'm going to walk you through 4 simple steps of mindfulness. And together they spell out the word rain. And so we have an R, which is recognize. What do you notice in this moment? Allow your breathing to slow down a bit. Take a couple slow breaths. Notice something you hear, even if it's a sound that's quiet or far away. Notice any feelings in your body. Whether pleasant or unpleasant. Just allow yourself to really take in what's around you, and also what you notice within you right now. Then we allow. So see if you can, just in this moment right now, allow yourself to feel whatever it is that you're feeling. Imagine yourself making more room. You might even try this physically by opening your palms or maybe expanding your shoulders slightly. Just create some space for whatever it is that might show up for you as we sit and breathe. And as you make space for what you notice right now, then we investigate. What thoughts are you listening to right now? What thoughts might be coloring your current experience or pulling you out of the moment right now? which physical sensations or feelings might be louder for you right now? We call these the sticky thoughts, the sticky feelings. Kind of like rubber bands. You try to flick them away and sometimes they just snap right back at you. Maybe choose one of these sticky thoughts or feelings for you. And try to nurture it. Try to care for that thought or feeling. Might be bothering or distracting you a bit. What if you could treat this thing like a child who came crying to you, or a precious animal, pet? What if you could treat this feeling like it was a dried flower that you're holding in your hands? You might even try holding out your palms and imagining there's a dried flower or something which is delicate and precious. How would you just naturally hold that precious thing? And try just in this moment right now to hold that, one of those unpleasant or sticky feelings. Hold it like that, just for this moment. With care, with compassion. Just one last time, check in with yourself. Notice how you hold your body, flow of your breath as you nurture and care for this part of yourself that might not be pleasant or wanted, but that's human and deserves that care and gentleness. When you feel ready, you can open your eyes and you can take a moment to stretch or shake out again, whatever feels comfortable. I just wanted to put these words on the screen. If you'd like to take note of them, or maybe just keep them in mind. Recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. And as we all move through this challenging time alone, but also together, you might find it helpful sometimes to practice these RAIN steps for yourself, for your own challenges, your own uncertainties. You can also practice these same steps for someone you care about, or maybe just the state of the world, wherever there's hurt. These steps may just help tend to that pain a bit. So I'll pass it back to Marissa for a few final thoughts about bringing this into our daily lives, which maybe for the lucky among us involves a dog wearing a scarf. I don't know.
Thank you, Carter. Yeah, I just wanted again to touch base on what it might look like coping during COVID. And so we know that this is probably going to affect us in a few different ways. And this can be physically, emotionally, socially, psychologically, maybe economically. It can come at us in a lot of different ways. And so I'm just going to try to present some additional coping strategies that you can try and implement in your daily lives. Okay, so an easy way to remember the practices that I'm going to go over is to think about the phrase face COVID. This is an acronym that was created by Dr. Russ Harris, who's a renowned ACT researcher and practitioner. So to talk about the F really briefly, focus on what's in your control. I want to acknowledge that it's very easy for us to get lost in worry and rumination about the future during this time in COVID. But, we might be thinking about things like, how is the coronavirus going to affect me? How will it affect my loved ones? When will a vaccine be ready? When do things just start to look normal again? But all of these things that we're thinking about and ruminating on are simply just out of our control. And when we worry about things that are out of our control, it can lead us to feel hopeless or anxious. So I'll invite you guys to practice this F of focusing on what's in your control, which might be your thoughts, your feelings, and the behaviors in the here and now. And so you might be asking yourself, well, how do we do this? Well, I want you to imagine a big storm coming through a harbor. What does a boat do that lives in this harbor as a storm is coming through? Well, the boat might drop and anchor because otherwise it's just going to be swept out to sea. So dropping the anchor doesn't make the storm go away, but it can really just hold the boat steady while the storm passes. And all of these stressors that we've talked about in the presentation today could be considered our, what we'll call an emotional storm. And we need to think about and learn how to drop our anchor. That leads us into the A and the C and the E of face. And so the first step in dropping our anchor is really acknowledging those thoughts and feelings. So silently and kindly just become aware of your thoughts, any feelings that you're having, memories, any urges that might be coming up, sensations that you're feeling. During this time, you might be saying, well, I'm noticing some anxiety, or I'm feeling sadness because I miss spending time with my friends or family. After you've acknowledged your thoughts, try to bring the attention to the physical body. And so you can do that a few ways, like maybe slowly breathing, maybe it's sitting up straight and kind of fixing your posture, or maybe pressing your feet into the floor. You're sitting at your work desk. The aim is to acknowledge your thoughts, but also becoming aware of the physical presence. And lastly, for the E, the goal is to be presently engaged in what you're doing. And so an exercise that you could practice is listing 5 things that you see in the room around you. And then maybe list 3 or 4 things, silently to yourself that maybe you're hearing. Is there something that you can smell or taste in that moment? And then lastly, what's the one thing that you're engaging in doing? There is an extended version of this acronym that you can put into practice, really implementing the COVID by Dr. Russ Harris. And you can find that by Googling the phrase face COVID with his name as well, Russ Harris, or you can go to the website that we've put on the slides. And in this recent RAIN exercise that Carter had led us through, we were really focusing on the A and the C, and really arguably the E as well. If you found it difficult to just sit in silence, I want you to know that you are not alone, and I'm about to offer you some alternatives that hopefully will help. So when can you practice being mindful? I think we all maybe have a stereotype of it has to be during a meditation practice and during yoga, or a time like that. But really, it can just be about any time. It could be the moment that you wake up in the morning. It could be when you're drinking your coffee, any time that you're eating, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or snacks. It could be when you're running errands even. And so for the last bit of reflection, I'm going to ask us to maybe just think about, when can you start implement being a little bit more mindful in your days? Think about your day tomorrow, or even after this webinar. And alternatively, maybe think about when you think you can absolutely not be mindful. And I think this will be a really good part for our discussion that we're about to lead into. One that came to my mind maybe is in the middle of an argument. How do you be mindful then? And then I'll just kind of pass it over to Carter for the last slide.
Great. Yeah, I love all those. I think finding those everyday moments is really the key, and there's no right answers, but I implore you to just notice the flow of your day right now. Because we often are so used to it that we don't kind of notice, maybe what we're doing, or kind of how our capacity for, awareness, mindfulness might kind of change throughout the day. So just finding some moments is the best we can ask for. And I love this quote by Jon Kabat-Zinn. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. Yeah, I think it pretty much says it all in terms of what we're talking about here. Yeah, so I hope some of these tidbits have been useful to you. And I think that's it for us. And I'm gonna stop sharing because I think Dakota wanted to put up a slide just with some information about kind of following up with the Sorensen Center here and these great resources we have. So we'll keep that slide up. And you know, in the last couple minutes we have left, we'd love to hear any thoughts or any questions you might have about, you know, how could I use this, or you know, maybe, you know, it could be about yourself or someone else who could be struggling at this moment, kind of how some of these practices might be helpful. We're happy to offer any thoughts that we can.
And everyone now has the option to unmute themselves. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask them.
This is just a general question. Towards the beginning, you were talking about the study that you went through, or all these studies that someone went through. I assume it's like a meta-analysis. And it showed that it worked really well in those cases. And I mean, I think anybody that tries mindfulness can agree that it feels nice. I'm curious if they've compared those same factors with other types of therapy, and if ACT is better for certain situations or geared towards specific things. You know, is it really meant, this mindfulness practice, is it meant to handle things as they come? Is it meant to develop resiliency?
I love that question so much. Thank you. And my first thought is that, you know, I think I would, there's one great resource I'm thinking of, which is Division 12 of the American Psychological Association. So you can Google that and find their website. They have a frequently updated list of the sort of status of the evidence for different common kinds of therapy. And you can sort of really see maybe some of the distinctions that you're talking about, you know, where for certain, like, you know, maybe for anxiety, there might be good support for ACT, but good support for some other therapies as well, and it'll kind of compare and contrast. And Marissa might have some thoughts about that too. And I know you do some work with meta-analyses. And the only other additional thought I had was that in our talk today, we were talking about the mindfulness kind of component of ACT. The other side of it, which we just didn't have time for, is related to more behavior and personal values, and things like, you know, setting goals, for instance. And when you look at like how ACT is used kind of as a complete treatment, it's not just mindfulness, right? It's kind of mindfulness in the service of, you know, making it easier to engage with meaningful parts of life, essentially. And I think for different, like, depending on, you know, different conditions or different challenges, like it's sort of a flexible scale. You know, different parts of the model might be more emphasized, and I think that's something that we're finding as we, you know, work with more and more kinds of people and kind of more target issues, is that you know, we sort of make small adjustments to the core model there. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Marissa?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think when we're comparing like mindfulness-based interventions, maybe generally across different, I mean, you've got different kinds of mindfulness-based therapies, and then you can kind of measure them across different groups of folks. And I think in research, you really have to kind of look at, are you looking at mental processing that's happening, anxiety, depression, distress, or are you looking at maybe a group of people who are experiencing chronic pain and you're trying to get at reducing pain through a mental process? And with these, you know, like which intervention or which components of the intervention might work best? I think the answer is like we're still figuring it out. I think there's probably little bits from multiple, but really we've got down to a core of like becoming present, you know, this kind of non-judgmentally thinking about your thoughts and behaviors, just kind of accepting things the way that they are. And then there's more like act-focused components of that, but really just the mindfulness space. I think it's just kind of a pathway to be able to work with the mental processes that are happening to then have like potential good outcomes of reduced stress, improved, you know, reduced anxiety levels and depression symptoms. I hope that answers the question.
It definitely does. Thanks for all that feedback. And also thanks for going through the practice. It was really nice.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'll ask a question that I feel like is helpful as you're moving in toward, you know, a more mindful based or a more present moment kind of attitude about life. Do you have any recommendations about, you know, ways to remember or, you know, just like small ways? I know we mentioned like of places that you can be mindful, but, you know, what can we do to help ourselves remember to be mindful?
One thing that comes to mind is setting a routine. And routines can be hard to implement, so I will recognize that. But if it's, you know, first thing when you wake up in the morning, try to implement like, I won't get out of bed until I kind of just do a quick body scan of how am I feeling? Or maybe it's while you're drinking your coffee, you're listening to a mindfulness app, just like a 10-minute guided meditation. A way to remember some of that stuff might be setting a reminder on your phone until it becomes a little bit more natural. If you journal, that might be a good way. Carter, do you have any other ways to remember to be mindful?
I think those are all great. And I think, you know, I think we all have a bias kind of towards simplicity and routine, which is, you know, why Marissa and I, like, we offered some different kind of acronyms in the talk. Maybe I'll add that in addition to kind of setting, you know, having a routine or kind of helping, you know, something to remind yourself to be mindful, I would try to be conscious of like what keeps you from being mindful. You know, like what are some of those blocks for you? And, you know, it could be something like checking the news, for instance, right? Or, you know, it depends, but something that might actually kind of activate some stress or rumination. And I think being conscious of what those habits might be too can help, because if you're more conscious of those, then you allow more space to, to bring in something else, to bring in more quiet or mindfulness or intentionality. There's a lot that we could all probably benefit from turning down a bit in our lives right now. Yeah.
Another thing I'll add to that, and just thinking Carter talk about it as well, is I think for those people who just have jam-packed schedules, or that just prefer to not sit silently or to slow down, like they just like being fast-paced. In my own personal practice, there's been moments where I can just feel like my jaw has been clenched for a while, or I feel like my body is really tense. And I know that that comes with practice, but somehow like remembering throughout your day, like if you're just feeling kind of wound up and tight physically, to call attention to that and say like, I should kind of just like ease up on my jaw a little bit, or maybe I just need to step away from the computer for 5 minutes, just do some deep breathing and then I'll come right back. Or if you're out grocery shopping, just think about physically, what are you feeling and doing grocery shopping, not what you had to do earlier in the day, what you have to do after your grocery shopping, all of the things on the list, maybe just like actively trying to be present in physically what you're going through. I just want to call attention to the physical component. That might be helpful.
Yeah.
That's great. We've got about a minute or so left. So if anyone else has any questions or closing thoughts, now would be a great time to share those.
I was wondering if you guys have any thoughts or resources about potentially using mindfulness-based stuff with children. I work in schools with a lot of kids who are going through a lot of stress right now, and I was wondering if you knew of any resources that maybe I could look at for some of them.
I love, yeah, that's great. So the first thing that comes to mind is that in our lab, one of our other graduate students named Julie is just started running a study for an ACT program for adolescents, all online, which will definitely get some of those skills. So that's kind of in the 12 to 17 range. And otherwise, I don't think we have this on a slide, but if you do just really like this approach, the sort of central website is contextualscience.org, and there's definitely a list. I'm sure there's a page devoted to using ACTS for younger folks, teens and children on there. Yeah, contextualscience.org. Yeah, do you have any other thoughts, Marissa, about just good places to find those kinds of resources?
Yeah, I think you've listed a few great websites. One that was coming to mind that's practical and you can try to like implement even after this webinar is that exercise that I had talked about where you ask the child, it depends on the age, but I think it's hard to ask children to kind of recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. So maybe just asking them like, if they're feeling kind of wound up or just having a day, maybe that they just name 5 things they see in the room, 3 to 4 things that they hear, and then a thing that they smell or maybe that they hear or taste, and then running through an exercise in that way where they can get kind of hands-on, or just it's an activity that's very brief that just gets them really centered to be like, oh, I'm in this space. I would maybe recommend doing something like that too.
Thank you, that's super helpful.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, Carter and Marissa, for your thoughts and for everybody who attended. This is our last ACT webinar for this semester, so you'll have to stay tuned with us on social media to see if our ACT friends will be back and sharing more next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, great to see everyone. Thank you.